Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Better Together Facebook Live show. My name is Barb Roos, and I am your host. And this Better Together Facebook Live show is where we talk about our hopes, our dreams, our worries, and our waistlines. And it does not matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what you've been through. Here on this Better Together show is where we find the hope, the help, as well as the practical next steps so that we can all get better together. And if you are joining us this evening for the first time, I want to say welcome. I am so glad that you are with us this evening. For those of you who watch regularly, I love you. Here, my friend Melinda, she jumps in. Hi. For those of you who are just joining, I would love for you as well to jump on in, say hi, tell me where you're from, and tell me about how you spent the day. What was something that blessed you today? How did you see God working in your life? And you can leave your comments there throughout tonight's broadcast and on every Better Together Facebook Live. I love answering questions. I love having you be a part of what it is that we're talking about. And since we are near the end of July, there has been a lot. I don't know about anybody else, but July has felt like, things are going on, but July has definitely felt like just a little kind of teeny bit of a breather. Yes, we still had the difficulties and the devastation of the pandemic. I do not want to undermine anyone who's been affected by that. But I don't know. Does it feel like we're getting used to the pandemic? I'm not sure about that. One thing for me I've discovered is how I keep masks everywhere, but I keep forgetting to grab them with when I get out of the car. I was laughing today because I have masks, handmade masks here at home. I have masks in my car, but I took a walk to the post office today, and it's only about a half a mile away. And I got all the way to the post office, got to the front door, and realized I had left my mask at home. Does that happen to anyone else out there? This is just one of the many changes that we have been going through in the year 2020. This year has been filled with a lot of things that have changed, a lot of things that we've had to deal with that we've never had to deal with before. And in fact, tonight, we're going to talk about a topic tonight that some of you may have never had to personally deal with before. But now there is this extraordinary opportunity before you. And so I've got a guest this evening who is a friend of mine, who has an expertise in an area that affects most all of our lives. And so we've got some friends who are saying, hey, hi, my friend Terry. Jennifer Curtis, thank you for saying hello. Jennifer says today she was blessed to hear what I do for a living truly impacted someone's life in a big way. Jennifer, honey, I'm giving you the high five on that. That is amazing. And then Jennifer came back and said that we had a conversation when the pandemic first started. And it's we have to hang in there and keep staying positive. And speaking of that, tonight we're going to talk about how can we make our workplaces safe for everyone, no matter their color or culture. This is a positive thing because for many of us, especially those of us who share my skin color, the workplace has been a difficult place for us. And so I want to introduce to you my guest this evening because we're going to talk about what it looks like, especially as we have been facing what has become the 2020 civil rights movement. So let me go ahead and introduce my guest to you this evening. I want to put her picture up there because she is just absolutely gorgeous. So I want you to see her. So friends, let me introduce to you, there she is, my friend Karen McNary. Karen is a native of Kentucky, now living in Charlotte, North Carolina, with her husband and 3 active sons. She's got some handsome young men as sons. Karen is passionate about God's word and has spent time equipping the church through organizations such as Bible Study Fellowship for BSF folks out there and Brownicity. In 2017, she merged her career in human resources with her love of God's word when she joined Proverbs 31 Ministries and now serves as the director of human resources. When she's not working, teaching, or blogging at KarenMcNary.com, you will find Karen uncovering overlooked jewels at the local thrift store. I absolutely love that. So friends, please join me in welcoming Karen McNary. Hey, Karen, how you doing?
Hello, I am great. So glad to be here. And hello to all your friends. So glad to join you this evening. So honored.
Well, we are glad to have you here on the Better Together Facebook Live. And so I am here in Ohio, and originally I was supposed to be seeing you this particular week. And so I'm sad that we won't see each other. Tell the audience what's happening this week.
Absolutely. So I work for, as Barb said, Proverbs 31 Ministries, and we have our annual Writers and Speakers Conference. It's actually our 20th year, and surprise, surprise, in COVID land, we are now doing all virtual. So I normally would have seen Barb, I could have hugged her and talked to her, but she's still going to be presenting. So ladies, if any of you guys have a desire to write or speak, it's not too late to go ahead and sign up. But again, it's going to be a wonderful time, and we're just grateful to see how God has allowed us to pivot. But I still wish I could see Barb. I can't wait for the day that I get to see her and talk with her in person. So.
Absolutely. And this year, even though we are sad that we can't be there in person, what I loved was hearing how many women with a dream of speaking and writing, how many have registered. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we have over 2,200 women who are signed up this year. So it is, again, online, it's allowed us to do more than we would have thought. So we are very grateful to be able to help women on their journey.
I love that. I am so glad to be a part of it. And ladies, I posted the link in the comments to the She Speaks conference. If you've got a dream of speaking and writing, you can tune in. And I am just really glad that because it is virtual, it created a space for you and I to talk today about the topic of anti-racism and being anti-racist in the workplace, making the workplace safe for everyone. And this topic, well, has come up in many ways because it's just time to have the conversation. So over the last few months, our country has been facing what I'm calling the civil rights movement of 2020. And so as you have lived through the large events that have caught the nation's attention, just tell our audience what you want to share about what it's been like for you watching our country have new conversations about race.
Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. I feel like I've had a range of emotions. From a practical standpoint, as Barb said, I have, 3 sons ranging 18 to 24. So I am kind of sad to see what created the need to have the conversations, but I'm very grateful that we're having them. And I feel like this is the perfect opportunity for the church to really lead. Because again, reconciliation is the message of the church. And I believe if you think about Martin King and the civil rights movement, that was the movement of the church Christians. So I'm excited for us to join in the conversation and really to lead and really glorify God through this horrific time.
Well, and this is why I love having you here, because I believe that for some Christians, they feel kind of trapped in the middle when it comes to having conversations about being anti-racist and loving Jesus all at work. Like it feels like it's just, they don't exactly know how to bring it together. And so in just a few moments, we're going to get into 4 ways that you talk about how we can be anti-racist at work, which really means making the workplace safe for everyone. But you've been involved in a variety of places for quite a long time now. So tell me about what it's been like for you as you are talking with people and encouraging people to champion being anti-racist. What is for you the passion behind it, and what is your hope for believers?
Well, I think it shifted years ago. I think we talked a lot about diversity, which is really just accepting and embracing people's differences. But this is now not just about differences, but it's recognizing that there are challenges in how people are seen and moving towards that. So for me, I believe that, again, the Imago Dei, the image of God, that's, we see that in Genesis. So as Christians, we know that we're all, everyone who is created, every man, woman, child, regardless of, race, color, or creed, you're created in the image of God. And when we discount people based on ethnicity or skin color or whatever, then we really are denying the image of God. So at the end of the day, it really is a biblical issue. It's about how we walk out of faith. And given how long we've had these issues in our country, I believe, again, the church, we have a perfect opportunity to really teach in a very practical way this basic doctrine of the Imago Dei, the image of God.
I love that. And I love how you beautifully explained the intersection between the two, that it's not two separate issues in the church where we talk about race outside of the church. It very much is about Imago Dei, and that as believers, this is a place where we really can walk in God's truth in the workplace. So let's go ahead and let's get started with that. And for the audience, what are some of the questions or confusion that you have when it comes to being safe in the workplace, when it comes to being anti-racist? What are some of the issues that you're running into? And while you guys are putting your comments in, I love that you are commenting real quick. Amy Morrissey said, Karen, you're right. Now is the time for the church to bring Jesus and his spirit into the picture in practical ways. That's so good. And so I want to say hi to Michelle and Brittany for joining us. Yeah, and so thank you for joining us. Now, Karen, number one, you said that for us to be anti-racist in the workplace, to make it safe for everyone there, to honor everyone there as the image of God, that we have to understand the nature of racism. And so I'm going to give you the floor for you to talk about what that means.
Okay. So I think, if I were to poll our audience and we ask, what is a racist? We would think of like Dylan Roof, the man who murdered the Charleston Nine. We would think of maybe those who were protesting in Charlottesville. But again, that is a very extreme manifestation. But racism actually is an ideology. It's an ideology that ranks people based on skin color. And it starts with, European descent at the top, and it almost always ends with blacks at the bottom. And so there's a ranking that goes from top to bottom, again, with blacks primarily at the bottom. The manifestation, again, the range, we often think about the extreme, like the Dylan Roofs, but it can be something as simple as telling racist jokes. It could be something as, subtle as maybe not wanting to be around some people. It could be like not wanting to marry into a family or not wanting someone to live next to you. So I think we tend to think of it in the extremes. Those are certainly there, but it's much more broader than that. And that's just on the individual level. But then I think most importantly is systemic. And so you take this ideology that ranks people, you add policies and power. Okay, so think about slavery for 246 years. We said, black are inferior. And so legally a system that enslaved people. And so think about it, even if you personally hold to that, you still lived in a system that did. Think about Jim Crow or segregation for 89 years. There are laws that said blacks and whites had to be separate. Think about redlining. That's where blacks were kept out or kept in certain areas. Think about the criminal justice system, where there's disparity between things like crack and cocaine, like crack, which is more low income people. I would say more people who are a different or lower income do crack versus cocaine, and they're different sentences. And that tends to fall on race. So these are just some examples of systemic racism. And so again, I think it's important that we understand the difference. And then when minorities are often talking about racism, they're talking about systemic systems, not necessarily the people. So it's important that we even understand the language and even understand the differences.
So when we are talking about systemic racism, especially in the workplace, what are some of the things that it might be helpful for people to see, to be on the lookout for when they're in their workplace that they may not have noticed before?
Right. So think about when we have conversations around diversity. What's often said is, I'm all for diversity, but I don't want to lower the standard. So think about what that's saying, that to add people of color, it equates lowering the standard. So think about what you're really saying. What you're saying is, again, people of color are less than. So those are the subtle things. Or you may hear things like, Barb, you are articulate. You know, that's a microaggression. And so think about, you know, you've been in this country, you know, how many generations, why wouldn't you be, you know? So there are subtleties in how viewed. So it's, you may hear people called, they're an affirmative action candidate, which is code for they're not qualified. So there are just some subtleties on the recruiting process when people come in. And then often when it comes to promotion, there's this feeling that can happen that if a minority is put in place, then it's not really because they're qualified, because you're trying to check a box. So sometimes minorities can be tokenized if a company, perhaps they want to feel like they're not being racist. And I know, Barb, you did a great blog on, are you a trailblazer, excuse me, or a token? So interesting. So that's a couple of subtle examples that you can think about.
Well, and I would like for you to, I'm going to give you a moment to think about a few more, simply because this is, for many, the first time that there's enough cultural shifting for people to have their eyes open. So think about a couple of more. I remember in 1997, I was recruited for a pharmaceutical sales company. And that company was beginning a new division. It was one of the largest drug companies in the world. And they specifically wanted to increase their number of African-American sales reps because the company knew that they had virtually none. And I remember being approached for the job. They asked me to interview. I have been out of college for a few years. And I remember wrestling with this idea of, okay, they're going to hire me, but am I going to get this really great job because I'm Black or because I'm qualified? Now, I had all of my performance reviews from my current job to let me know that I was really good. But I think that for those of us who are the lone brown face or one of a few brown faces in white spaces, at work, there always is this feeling of having to work harder and harder and harder because we know that others are questioning. Right. So can you speak to that and how that is a manifestation of racism?
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to what does it mean to be qualified? And again, I see this because, you know, when I start recruiting, I have a job description that has certain qualifications. And it may say, you know, 5 years experience, you know, graduate degree or whatever it is. But what we're finding is that with people of color, we have to have every qualification listed, or we're deemed not qualified. But if it's someone who's not a person of color, they can look and say, well, I know they don't have this, but I see their potential. So sometimes in the workforce, people of color, we're hired on accomplishments, but whites often can be hired based on potential. And so it's a difference in the viewing. That's been my experience. Okay, so think about that coming in the door. And Barb, to your point, if you think about, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, we have 4 Black CEOs. That's 4, and only 8% are people of color. Think about the Fortune 100 and the Fortune 500. So that's not a high representation. As people, we are Black. Speaking of Blacks, we are 12% of the population, but only 3% of senior leadership in Fortune 100 companies. So, and there's not necessarily correlation between education. So it seems like if we do get in the door, we tend to have, I don't want to say more qualified, but we have to meet every qualification to get in the door compared to our counterparts. But then rising up is harder and harder. So again, you can see this disparities based on it, and it's not based on education or experience. Okay, it's just, so this goes back to that ideology that can manifest itself, and it's subtle because no one just says. It's not conscious. It's almost like an implicit or an unconscious bias, but it's an ideology that as Christians that we have to take our thoughts captive. We have to allow the Lord to really show us this, because again, it's the water that we breathe. It's just a part of our system that we have to dismantle, and we can do that with the work of the Holy Spirit. So those are just a couple of examples that I can think of.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought prayer into this, because we're going to talk about advocacy in a moment. Number 3, you were talking about understanding company culture. And so when when I look at the ladies who've commented today, some work for large businesses, some work for smaller independently owned companies, others work for government organizations. What are some of the things in company culture that we need to have our eyes open to?
I think it's important to really ask the questions or really assess, what is the commitment to diversity and inclusion in your company? And so that looks like, do you have a statement? If you go to senior leadership, is it something that they've thought about? Can it be articulated? And is the commitment, is it internal, meaning staff, or is it more external, meaning how you reach your customer base? You want to look at your staff. Does your staff represent your customer base? Is there a desire to expand your customer base if it's homogenous? As you look at your senior leadership, what percentage are minorities? And we can add women. Okay, so those are some things really to look at your culture and have an honest assessment of where you are. And again, I think it just goes to really being okay to ask the question and just and really dig into what are the reasons behind that. Okay.
That is so good. There have been a few comments that have come in while you were talking about company culture, or while you were talking about manifestation. And I think that I love what Melinda said. She's like, you're making powerful points. I love how you talked about how people of color are often hired because of their accomplishments, whereas counterparts or majority culture is hired off of potential. I think that's absolutely huge. And in some ways it's very disheartening, because it is, it feels like an extra burden that's placed on a person of color, that they have to prove themselves before they ever get into the door.
Right. And Barb, those are subtleties, because again, I believe people genuinely want to diversify, but because there's this fear that I'm really kind of dumbing down, so I'm going to look to the person that has everything so I can say, see, this is the person. So you're right, it becomes extra burdensome, I think, on both sides, because again, no one wants to, hiring is challenging. You want to hire the right person. You want to, we all want the same things. But you're right, it does create a challenge, because potential is something that you can't prove potential. I can prove my accomplishments, but potential, that's by faith. You have to have faith to see that in me. So, but again, as people of faith, we can do that, because that's where our faith and asking God to really help us rethink these things and rethink these stereotypes. I think we can lead by example. We can do it.
Love that. Well, the last part of the 4 tips, number 1 is that we want to understand the nature of racism. Number 2 is understanding how it manifests itself, which you explained so powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 is understanding the company culture. And then the last is, what does it mean to advocate in a company? What does that look like practically? Define it for us.
Okay. I think the first part of advocating is to understand the reality of what it's like to be a person of color, particularly if they're in a majority white space. It can be lonely. We can face biases on a regular basis. We know that oftentimes we're thought of as less qualified. We can tend to be tokenized. There can be microaggressions. So it's just being aware that the experience of a person of color is different. I think that's the first thing, is just to have that understanding. And then I think the next thing is to really kind of reject some of the, I have this, I can't believe this conversation. So when something happens at your company that you find offensive, the first thing is you go to the person of color and you tell them. But the reality is the person of color is probably already traumatized by it. So an advocate is not going to go to the person of color, but tell the person who can make a difference. So to use your influence and steward that for change. I mean, that can be hard, but I think that's what we need, people who will speak up. And then wherever you are, whatever your sphere of influence, seek to have a different perspective. If you are a part of hiring, then advocate for perhaps bias training for your managers. Implement clear, consistent promotion criteria, and resist the desire to only limit persons of color to diversity initiatives. There's a study that some of the senior executives in the C-suite, they're all diversity and inclusion managers. And again, nothing wrong with that, but again, Barbara, you're a speaker. You're a Bible teacher, so just resist to limit us to that one area. And so I think the last thing that I want to end with is as we just look at diversity really like the synoptic gospels. They were written by 4 different men to different audiences, and neither is wrong in itself. But think about the complete picture of Christ that we have when we have them all together. And that really is the goal of having a diverse and inclusive workforce that is safe for everyone, that we have our perspectives are shared, and we have a broader picture and a broader goal. So
that's good. I love that idea of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all had different relationship with Jesus. They recorded a lot of the same events, but then there were some very important differences that help us paint a bigger picture of what Jesus' time on earth was like. Oh, that's so good. And in order to gain that bigger picture, you've got some book recommendations. The first is What Lies Between Us by Dr. Lucretia Berry. Tell the audience about this.
Yeah. So Dr. Lucretia Berry is an educator, and she really has a desire to give Christians, well, not just Christians, but she's obviously a Christian, but give people a framework to talk. So she really starts from the beginning and starts with how to identify things like racism and systemic racism to give a consistent language. And then she just walks us through some historical narratives. She really helps us understand really the why behind racism, and then gives us tools to talk about it and really become an advocate to be anti-racist.
Beautiful. And then we want to also talk about Latasha Morrison's Be the Bridge, the New York best-selling time for Latasha. for number of weeks at my church, and we have about 12,000 people who are there for a number of weeks. Our lead pastor put the picture, as well as he's read it. Many of our executive team have read it. And so we are, oh, absolutely. And so explain why Be the Bridge has become such a powerful resource recommended by so many churches.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Latasha Morrison, she and I mean, we're all kindred spirits in that she believes that the church is the answer. And she has a wonderful way of, it's a well-written narrative, and she integrates history with her personal story, her personal struggles. She's very honest with herself and her own struggles. She deals with topics. I mean, she deals with racism, she deals with colorism, but she walks us through a process of really kind of lament, confession, and then reconciliation. So she moves us along, and it's biblical. I mean, it is biblical. And again, it's the church, and she understands prayer, the power of the Holy Spirit. So again, it's, if you're a Christian, I mean, she's singing our song, it's our role. And it's an easy book. It's an easy read. 3 weeks. I mean, I've done 2 book studies on it by now. It's a great read. It's good to do individually. And then you can, with your church, you can grab 3 or 4 girls and just get together and learn. So it's a very easy read. It's easy to digest.
Love it. Well, we've got a couple of questions that we want to cover real quick before we go. First, Michelle Meeks, she said, "You're doing an amazing job, Karen," and I would applaud that. One of the questions One of the questions I asked the audience was for them to share about any questions or confusion. And so Terry, actually, whoops, I grabbed Melinda. So thank you, Melinda, for sharing your comment. Terry, she talked about Black Lives Matter, the organization. There are lots of different things that the organization is advocating for. So for her, the question was staying focused on racial support with non-believers without getting into other groups who believe that they're marginalized. And this is a question I've gotten many times from people where they say, well, I can't support Black Lives Matter because of the organization. My easy answer is you don't have to support anything you don't want to support. The hashtag is different than the organization. And so that's been my answer. How about you?
Yeah, I kind of think about the Good Samaritan, and I think about, we can take the posture of, the religious leaders who walk by, or we can take the posture of the Samaritan and help. I mean, the Samaritan or the person who was injured, why was he there? Who knows? And so for me, I just have decided I'm going to do the work. And, I will say, for me as a Black person, my life does matter. And I didn't even realize it was an organization until I was like, what are y'all talking about? So I think, again, just do the work. And so let people, they can debate about a movement all they want to, but, God calls us to be our brother's keeper. So I think that's where we have to land.
Love that. I love that. Well, and then I think we've got one more, and Terry had another question. She wanted to know if we had any thoughts on the book or the concept. I have not read the book White Fragility. I've listened to an interview, and I've listened, but as an African American woman, I don't spend a lot of time there because that's not my fight.
Mm-hmm. And actually, and it was helpful for me to understand some of the pushback that I get. Because I didn't, again, because it's not my story, but I appreciated her sharing the why behind the way people react. So it helped me know, number one, how to pray. And it kind of gives me a better understanding. So I found it helpful just from the standpoint, because now I understand the reason behind some of the responses I tend to get.
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I watched a fairly long TED Talk, and I think a PBS interview, and felt like, and that was kind of the same thing where I just went, oh, okay. But then again, like half my family, my former in-laws, like I spent 25 years in that. So, I learned some stuff.
It's like, okay.
Oh, and so Melinda, I love that Melinda captured that God calls us to be our brother's keeper. And I believe that that is a perfect way for us to wrap up today's Better Together Facebook Live. That we are called to be our brother's keeper, that we are called, as Karen talked about the Good Samaritan, for us to be there, to be side by side, to be invested in loving and caring for everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter what they've been through, and especially for those who have privilege and influence, to use it for those who need it, especially your brothers and sisters of color. So Karen McNary, thank you so much for being on today's Better Together Facebook Live.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you so much.
And friends, if you want to get connected with Karen, you can go to KarenMcNary.com. She is a brilliant and wise woman that you will enjoy learning from. And if you want to watch this episode again, you can right on this Facebook page, or you can watch previous episodes of the Better Together Facebook Live at barbruce.com on the blog page. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I agree with Melinda. It has been a powerful conversation, friends. I am so glad that you are a part of it. I will see you next Tuesday for a new episode.